So we're going to start a new subtopic within this, and that we're going to look at the general concept, which is it's meta-halachic. It also involves, obviously, a significant amount of hashkafa and perspective, and that is we'll go from macro to micro, which is the notion of women having positions of power. We'll call it positions of power for the moment. The technical term in halacha will be called a minui of sarara, meaning a power, authority, sovereignty in some sphere. Is that halachically objectionable? And then it will play itself out as we get a little bit more towards the end with the so-called women rabbis, rabbah, maharat, yoetzet, poseket, or all the various different shades. And I'm not lumping, for the purpose of the video, because I know there are people who watch who I'm not lumping them all into the same, necessarily by any means into the same category, but let's do this in a careful and thoughtful manner. Again, we will try also not to descend into polemics, right? Any idiot can do that, right? Okay, so we're going to start slightly left of field, only just because of where we are, okay, which is here in Berlin, in the Rabbinerseminar, and I felt it's important, so we'll start with a tshuva from the Sridei Eish. Okay, so that's the first thing you have in front of you, which is note the date. It's always important in a tshuva to date something, to get a sense of what was happening at the time. Okay, so this is 1951, and it's written, this is not, you might look and say it's of Apple. It wasn't. I actually believe, I may be wrong, but I wonder whether it's Diane Apfel from Leeds. I wonder. I'm not 100% certain. Either way, so this tshuva is written when the Sridei Eish was in Montreux in 1951. Somachti b'michtavoi, I was happy to receive your letter. And Sarah, by the way, this is not meant to be just although I do tend to do most of the talking, by all means, please, it's not meant to be so much of a lecture, but although it kind of turns out that way, I was actually reflecting on that the other day. More than happy, I need to actually encourage more, probably something I need to do. Okay. Samachti b'michtavai, I was happy to receive your letter. And as a result of me not being in the rudest of health, I delayed responding for the last few weeks. So he asked a question about women and voting. Now, from just translating those words, it's difficult to know, because as we're going to see very, very soon, there are two aspects to involving women in a democratic process. And maybe we should actually sort of almost stop here and ask ourselves a much higher level question. And that is, how did Democritus, right, who was not a good Jewish boy by any means, how did he find his way into Judaism? Or does he find his way into Judaism? We're so used to seeing democracy as the touchstone of, civilization and progress, and seeing it as something that is incredibly positive, that we actually almost never stop to think and question it. So, for example, just to give you a very simple example, there are people who make the case very much against it. It may just be the best of the best system that we can possibly devise, or that's secular. Yeah. So, for example, I was involved. I voted for Brexit. Okay, for my sins or whatever. I actually voted for it, but that's neither here nor there. But the idea that part of the great, unwashed, ignorant masses, was able to have the same say in it as a professor of economics in Oxford is somewhat insane. There's no weighting given. That's just one argument.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, we can see from the last parasha, you have actually probably a verse one after another, there's lots of Rabim Levaot, and then just afterwards, it's like Rabim Levaot. It's like
But if I may, good point, very good point. We just had in Mishpatim, and Sarah is challenging me and saying we do find the concept of following having a vote and following the majority, which would appear to be the basis of democracy. It does seem to be a Jewish concept.
Yeah, but on the other hand,
what's the answer to that?
No, but on the other hand, it's also we said like we have the two ways. So one of them is like לא תהיה אחרי רבים לרעות. It's like on the one verse.
Yeah, but how? Well, so who decides? First of all,
But actually, it's more or less it's talking about the Sanhedrin. No?
thank you. I was waiting for that. It was not the great and unwashed, as we say in England. Right? It's not just it's not the concept of anybody on the street. These were, and even within the Sanhedrin, it wasn't just let's all just vote. Poischin min hatzad. There was hierarchy. There was a recognition that just because you were a member of the Sanhedrin did not mean you had equal weighting. And this is something we've spoken about recently, haven't we? Yeah, some rabbi taking on Rav Shachter or Rav Moshe Feinstein or whoever and kind of deciding that, partnership minyanim are perfectly okay, and actually having the arrogance and the, I would say, delusion to think that their words carry as much weight as somebody else is the equivalent of some physics graduate having a serious argument with Stephen Hawking on cosmology. I mean, you'd get laughed out of court in any other discipline. There is peer review. There is an acknowledged hierarchy that comes from within, as we discussed. And therefore, back to your point, yes, it is true. We did have voting, but the voting, first of all, it proceeded. It wasn't just. It was done in a way so that those of lesser, those who were acknowledged, they sat on the side, as the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin. Yes, poischin min hatzad with the dinei nefashos, because their words carried less weight. Because if you reversed the order, you'd be stuck. They couldn't open their mouths then. So it was to some extent regulated, and even the vote. We're talking about a vote within peers who are authorized to do so, but not a regular guy off the street to have exactly the same say on matters of state and policy as a don from Oxford, etc. So it's not a great challenge, but I hear the concept. So the question is, b'bchiras noshim. Now, the way that I would translate that is the choosing of women. Now, women can either vote or be voted in. Okay, so not clear from that Lashon so far what he's referring to, but let's have a look. He takes us on a whistle-stop tour, literally in a few sentences. It's very tantalizing. Hagon Reb David Tzvi Hoffman Zatzal, of course, the other rector over here, the Melamed Lahoyel, Hitir es habechira ha'aktivis v'osar es habechira ha'passivis. The Melamed Lahoyel allowed women to have a vote, but did not allow them to be voted into positions of communal power. Okay? Ulam, that was Reb David Tzvi Hoffman's view. Ulam, Rabbonei Eretz Yisrael, he sort of lumps them all together, which is quite interesting. And again, of course, you have to see this against the backdrop of the suffragette movement and women getting their own persona in politics, in law. They were actually allowed in English law until I think it was 18. I didn't do the research before. I should have done it. I have a vague memory of until sort of 18 something. They were chattel of their husbands. They almost didn't have a persona. I'm not even sure they were allowed to own property independently. And then, of course, we had this whole change. The suffragette movement are giving everybody the vote. So this is the backdrop. This is 1951. Okay? So, Reb David Tzvi Hoffman said they can vote, but they cannot be voted in. So they have a voice, but they can't be voted. So he clearly has an objection to them operating in the public sphere, but he's okay with them having a vote. Ulam, Rabbonei Eretz Yisrael v'chein Baal HaChofetz Chaim Zatzal, v'hagon Reb Chaim Oizer, that's Reb Chaim Grudzinski Zal, v'oid. Again, tantalizing. Who are these v'oid? But we've got Rabbonei Eretz Yisrael, Chofetz Chaim, and Reb Chaim Oizer against Reb David Tzvi Hoffman, which is interesting. They osru gam ha'bechira ha'aktivis. They wouldn't allow them to vote either. And I think we might need to clarify at some point. I'm just going to throw it out here because I don't know if we're going to get the time or the chance. What is this? What are they actually discussing? I'd have to do a bit more research. Were they talking about voting as within the Polish elections? Was that the Shaila? Very possibly. In civil elections, nothing to do. In other words, it may have had absolutely nothing to do with Judaism per se, what they were voting on. It wasn't a question of them having input into our internal legislative or social regulation or whatever. But it may have just been don't forget, Poland pre-war, you know, you had Reb Meir Shapiro was famously a member of the Polish Parliament. There was 30% of Warsaw, a very fashionable capital city, was Jewish. So they had significant input.
Yiddish was the...
Yiddish, they had, I think it was a dozen daily Yiddish newspapers. You could go L'Tzarenu, you could go Friday night and see Romeo and Juliet in Yiddish. And this was, Hollywood was very heavily influenced by fashion and film and literature. We must not think of Warsaw as some sort of backwater. It was at the forefront, it was a cutting edge, cool capital, much like Berlin today. So I'm almost certain that's probably what it was referring to. But either way, it is not presumably it's Megidrei Atznius. What else would be the reason for a woman not to vote for a mayor of Warsaw? Presumably, the activity of voting is incompatible somehow with a woman's status. That's what seems to be. Chofetz Chaim, Reb Chaim Oz, and the Rabbanei Yisrael. Fascinating. We're going to delve into this a little bit more. Yeah. V'harav Roshi Uziel b'sifrei Mishpatei Uziel materes habchira livcher ulehibocher gam yochad. And here we have on the other end of the spectrum Rav Uziel, the Rav Rashi, who is matter everything. They can vote and they can be voted. And almost certainly that was a reference to the Israeli elections. Almost certainly, given who he was. So you have a really interesting machlokes. And here the Sridei Eish, I think, is a little bit diplomatic. He says, why should I open myself up and nail my colors to the mast, like either the Oisrim or the Matirim? Fascinating thing. Why should I do that? Look, he's answering. Rav Apel has asked him a shaila, and he's kind of not answering. Let matters play themselves out. It's actually it's noteworthy in itself. This is sometimes there is a psak. I'll tell you a quick story. Whenever I can, as you know, I try and throw in ideas in terms of Rabbonos and Hanhoga. In Gibraltar, straight after the war, was in Ruchnistic terms, wasn't in a great place. The civilian population during the Second World War were evacuated to London, to Madeira, and only the soldiers, because Gibraltar was it was fighting, it was only soldiers were there. So when the Kehillah then regrouped, when you dislocate, lots of not such great things happen. And it was in a very weak state spiritually. I won't say more in case people watch the video, but that is a fact. And they brought a young Rav who did a number of incredible things, which I will share with you. His name was Rav Pacifici, Zechreinu Levracha. He died only relatively recently. He was Italian, and he was besides being a Talmid Chacham, but a very smart man, a very wise man. And he did a couple of things. One of the things I'm going to tell you that he did, just as an interesting, he focused almost entirely on two things: on chinuch, on teaching Torah, even to the extent there's a story that I heard. My father-in-law's Gibraltarian, right? Rabbi Hassan, originally from Gibraltar, and I lived there, so I was in the koil there, so I know the people very, very well, the culture. But it's really as a result of him. He sowed the seeds post-war. This could easily have gone. Gibraltar could have gone the way of all other provincial cities or little towns that have disappeared off the Jewish map. Instead, it is one of the strongest. From a Jewish perspective, it is strong. It is stable financially, economically, Torah-wise. And this is as a result of his foresight and wisdom and vision and what he did. So first of all, the story, it's not apocryphal, it's true. The president of the community was marrying off his daughter, and he printed the invitations, and he did not consult the Rav Rav's employee. He's got to be there in Nefutzot Yehuda. If you know that, if you've ever been, he was into the main synagogue, La Flamenca, and he was the chuppah. And the chuppah there is a very ornate, beautiful, regal affair. It's very beautiful. It really is beautiful. The choir singing Shoshant and whatever. It's very, very nice. And not that our chuppahs here are not nice. We've had some pretty nice ones here now, but okay, it's different. It's a little bit different. Al Kol Ponim, they're sitting there and they're waiting. The Rav isn't there. Now, it's very, very small. There's a little road called Baumhaus Lane, where the Talmud Torah, the primary school, is literally 30 meters from the shul. Literally. It's a tiny little lane. And they're waiting at the chuppah, and they go in, and the Rav is in the Talmud Torah teaching the little kinderlach, chumash and thing. What are you doing? He said, what do you mean? You know, between 2:30 and 4 p.m. every afternoon, I am teaching in Talmud Torah. But the wedding. I said, did you ask? Did you consult? This is my job. I'm teaching Talmud Torah. You want to do a wedding? You can do another time, whatever. And he continued teaching. So, now...
He wasn't fired.
No, he wasn't apparently. But just gives you an indication, first of all, of strength of character. But, by the way, there was another important line he always used to say, and this is, I'll get to that in the end. The other point is he identified maybe half a dozen max young men who had promise, and girls, to be fair, who he felt were individuals of potential quality. One of them was my father-in-law. Another one was a guy called James Levy, Chaim Levy, who today is the president of the community. He is the managing partner of the largest international law firm. He has 1 million in his own. He has 200 employees plus, multi-millionaire, big Balt stocker, very, very Torah. Gives me my Dafiomi Charusu. He's still in 6:30 every morning. He's got children in the Bnei Torah, now they're partners in his firm, and he really built it up. He made Sir Joshua, Tito Salvador, my wife's great uncle, made him rich. It was Hassan's. It's the biggest international law firm. He's regularly ranked in one of the top 100 international lawyers worldwide every year. He's a deal maker. The chief minister is one of his talmidim. Whatever. So he identified Rav Pasafici identified my father-in-law, a young man called Avraham Cohen, who went on. He's the Cartier jeweler there, and he's also Ben Torah and started the kollel. He identified a small pool of young men and women with promise, and he invested in them. And he sat and learnt with them, and he groomed them in the positive sense. And they all went on. He invested in quality, and in the next generation, it produced quantity. That was a very, very smart move. Very smart move. That was one thing. That's just, when you come to a place, to have it's also a humility. It's the realization that perhaps in my lifetime, in my tenure, I won't even see the fruits of my labor. But that this makes sense. It's strategic. It's not tactical. It's strategic. And it paid off. And today, it's one of the few kehillas in Europe that are not mamish in the center of a cholent pot, that are growing, are flourishing. Chaim Levy says to all the boys and girls, you go to yeshiva, you go to university, you go to SEM, you get a degree, come back, I'll guarantee you a job. You'll be my in-house counsel, you'll be my lawyer, an accountant, I think, and that's another challenge that we have to do here, but that's another story. And it's flourishing, and there's kollel, and there's dafayomi, and there's a lot of learning going on, and I opened a boys' school when I was there. So that was one thing. But what I wanted to tell you, which is again, that was a good opportunity just to share that, but to come to the point about him not answering. Rav Pasafici, and here's a halacha. Here's an important thing. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, I heard this from some of my rebbes, and this is something you need to know. You can never, ever say al ha'osur mutter. Torah is not our plaything. There are occasions when you can be makel, and you need to know how much you can be makel, when you can be makel. Shas hadchak kedi eved domi is a concept in halacha, and very often we need to bend over backwards and be makel, especially when dealing with balei tshuva and their extended family, and you can use every kula in the book, provided you know what you're talking about. But if you get to a situation where there is no way around it, you cannot, it is absolutely forbidden You can't say al ha'osur mutter. You can't do that. So what do you do? So this is what Rav Pasafich used to do. There are various, so you don't want to lose a person. I actually had this situation here, I won't go into details, a couple of months ago. It's a tricky, it's always family situation. It's never, can the rice fell in the thing, and then it's fleshka non ben yoyma, and can I eat my soup tonight, and can I have it with butter? That's kind of our bread and butter, if you excuse me. That is easy, nat by nat, I'm finished, job done. But the real tough thing is, I won't say what the shaila was, because to protect the guilty, but it was a shaila where about a relationship, I think, and there was absolutely no way. So I took a leaf out of Rav Pasafich's book, and I'll tell you the lashon he used to use. He used to say to somebody, that wasn't the question I was waiting to hear from you. Come back with another question. Which was a nice way of saying, no, but I'm not going to tell you no. And obviously you can only do that when you've built up a reservoir of trust, of respect. There's a relationship there. Then you've, as I may have told you before, you've put relationships is like a bank account. You've invested, you've made a deposit, then you can make a withdrawal on a rainy day when you need to. Trust me. Then you can, and it doesn't damage the relationship. If you've never deposited, you can't make a withdrawal. Yeah, and it's too late. So he used to ask me another question. That wasn't the question. I was hoping you were going to give me another question. So he's got around the problem. He hasn't said al ha'osur mutter, because you can't do that. On the other hand, the other guy knows, this is not good, but he's preserved the relationship, and he's opened the door and said, come back with ask something else. Ask me something else. It's a smart line. Now, Hakol has man v'amokim. What I said in this particular situation was, I used the following line, which I felt was appropriate for this person and my relationship with them. And I said to them, first of all, a rule, by the way, these sort of things, never, ever, ever, ever do it by WhatsApp or by email. Ever a phone call, primarily these sort of things, when they're sensitive, always face to face, because there is so much of the human interaction, whether it's body language, whether it's tone, it's so many things that you convey when you speak. I'm adopting a certain persona at the moment as I'm saying this, which is a little bit different to how I'm normally in my bombastic self when I'm teaching a thing. And that's, I didn't intend to doing it, but I'm now being self-aware as I'm doing it. You make a connection which you can't make, you just can't make other ways. And things like this, you need to look at the person in the eye. And I said to them, are you sure you want to ask me this question? I used that was my phrase, which was appropriate. They smiled and said, okay. And we're good. What did they do? I don't know. But I'm not achroi. I think it was the best I could have done in that situation. What you cannot do, however, is falsify Torah. It's not our plaything. And as a maramokim for you, there's a Yam Shel Shlomo in Bava Kamel Amud Ches, the whole story with the Romans. When they show Shel Akum, show Re'ehu v'lo show Shel Akum, which was a big red flag for them. They said, we beautiful Gemara, right? Famous Gemara. You know the Gemara, right? We've got all your Torah is great, everything's fine. We're stuck on this teeny little bit of racism when it comes to civil damages. And what did the Chazal do? They didn't falsify it. Why not? Asks Yam Shel Shlomo Chasam Sofer, also in another place. It could be Pikuach Nefesh. This is the Romans. I mean, these are people who were capable and who actually did bring about Churban. Pikuach Nefesh. Pikuach Nefesh is not a reason to falsify Torah. That's a yesod of the Yam Shel Shlomo and the Chasam Sofer, but leaving that for another time. Sahar, what did you want to ask?
Yeah, but I wanted to ask, the question was, we said that sometimes, is your answer to that means that it's not the oraita, therefore it's better for them to do it by shogeg, or at least not do it by mezid, so that's why you don't want to answer? Because I heard it once that you should not, unless it's the oraita, if you know that the person is not going to listen to you, it's better not to tell them what the halakha is. So,
very good. That is a Ramah in Tafresh Ches, is it? Tafresh Vav, Tafresh Ches, Yom Kippurim, Mutiv Shiyushegin Valiyum Mezidin, as long as it's not Mufurish Bikra. That is, look there. It's Mufurish, that depends whether it's Mufurish Bikra, not even whether it's Deraisa or Drabanan. Is it Mufurish Bikra? That's the Geder. So we do find often Chazal, Hanach lahem liYisrael. Mutav shiyu shogegin b'al yomei zidin. But that means that is in the sphere of not actively objecting. But when somebody comes and asks you, you don't have the luxury anymore of ignoring them. You can't ignore them. They've asked you a question. You have to answer. So you've got to say something. That's not the same thing as Mutav shiyu shogegin means there's things that happen in this kehillah, as with every Rav, as with a father, as with a teacher, which you pick your battles. A smart person picks their battles. You choose the smart teacher knows what to ignore. What do you ignore? The stuff that happens in this kehillah and in shul, like in which I bite my tongue and I swallow. And I keep your powder dry until you fight the battles that are worth fighting, that are possibly either winnable or they are ones that are so fundamental that they're existential. There has to be a cheshbon, and that's the same thing with parenting and with any relationship, really. Yeah, any relationship. So it was an aside, but I hope an important aside. Okay, you look tired. You good? Coffee? L'chaim. I've got tea. Open the window. Go on, let's open the window. Let's get a bit of fresh air. I find it, if nobody objects, not that one doesn't open. Oh, it does? Okay, good. Right. Beseda. Are we good? Weiter. So look what he's doing. He is effectively saying, I don't feel compelled to respond to you. Sorry, Rabbi Apfel, Diane Apfel. I don't feel compelled to respond to you. Why should I stick my head? The Gemara says in Yivamas, to be meniach roshim b'shnei horim gedolim. Yeah? I don't need, naniach hadava, leave it. I mean, you think about it. Imagine you send somebody a shayla and he asks and says, I don't want to pass him. That's effectively what he's doing. He says, why should I bother? Naniach hadava lizman sheyovoy v'yachriya. Lo ha'oisrim. And then he gives us a little bit of insight. He says as follows, Lo ha'oisrim yesh tam musari. Really interesting. And this is going to be a big theme as we make our way. It's already begun to be a theme with Rav Shachter's Psak, if you remember from Partnership Minyanim. But here's the fascinating thing. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky. Let's be a bit cheeky. Why not? It's really interesting that it is sometimes those who arguably are not always totally makbid on halacha, champion halacha and kind of almost recognize only halacha when they challenge or buttress their own new positions. They don't want to hear anything else, anything that is meta, masorah. You say words like that and they hate it. And it's often, not always, but it is often, like I said to you, I mean, I don't want to repeat it necessarily. It's often people who are often quite happy to take a das yochid and the most lenient opinion on something in halacha, champion halacha, and everything all of a sudden becomes very technical when they want to support their own innovations. There's a certain inconsistency. It's subtle. Never mind. So, but Rav Weinberg says mafurish, laha'isrim yesh tam musari. He calls it tamus shezeh negedat snias sheisha ta'asek binyon tzibur v'akol. It's a musar. Gam meviim raya misifri shoftim. There's a sifri which we're going to start looking at. This is the sugya we're going to start looking into the sources. They bring a raya from a sifri in shoftim. Melech v'loy malka. When the pasuk says same tosim melech or melech, it's melech. It says the sifri v'loy malka. V'gechein mebrachas memhei noshim avodim ktanim ein mezamnin aleihem. You don't make a zimun for them. She'ein chavarosom noet. It's not appropriate. V'chein b'megilach of gimel ishalei tikra b'torah b'nei kvodat sibul. We discussed this already, right? V'yesh lidchos ulefalpel. And this is actually quite a genius. I love this last line and a half. V'yesh lidchos ulefalpel. Of course you could push back and engage in all sorts of dialectic and hair splitting and pilpul to show that it's okay. Aval ein to'eles bepilpul. This is genius. Ein to'eles bepilpul. Ki yesh b'zeh ta'amim yoser amukim. The end. And he leaves us on that tantalizing cliffhanger. There's no point going into the pilpul. You could make a case to say, yes, we could be mafalpul, maybe there's room for it in halacha, but actually there is nothing even to be gained by the pilpul because there's a subtext There is something else going on over here, which is deeper. That's it. And this is Rav Weinberg, who was not, you've heard this phrase from me before, he wasn't backwards in coming forwards. He was quite okay to be quite outspoken and not always toe the so-called Haredi party line by any means. He was very outspoken on a number of things. But I found that line really, really interesting.
Does he not refer here?
Sorry?
Does he not refer to something sod at the end? That's why he doesn't want to make it people.
Well, I don't know if he...
It means like, I don't know, from the side it seems like he doesn't want to get into Kabbalah. Or to
well, the question is, I'm not sure whether when he uses the word Amukim, one would have to... I'm not a big Baki in his Ksavim. Yeah. I do...
But it sounds like somebody reads...
I'm not sure whether that would be that was his milieu at all. Yeah. I don't think so. It doesn't sound like it. To me, it doesn't read it, because I don't think that was something that he was known for, as far as I'm aware. I think, if anything, he was not... I wouldn't associate him with Kabbalah as such, to the best of my knowledge. But okay. Right, let's see. So now we're going to, over the page, we're now going to start... we're going to try and zip through, as much as we can, the halacha and the sources. Says the Rambam, Ein ma'amidin isha b'malchus. A woman may not... You can't appoint a woman as a king, as a queen. Shenema olecho melech v'loi malka. And this we saw was the Sifri. It's actually Medrash Tanoim, right? V'chein. Now here the Rambam does something interesting, which is a machlokes rishonim. He extends the concept of women, that you can't have a woman as a queen, as not being limited just to sovereignty, but he extends it. And this is not something that all the Rishonim agree to by any means. V'chein kol mesimos shebi Yisrael ein memanim bohem elo ish. Any mesima, any mission, any position in Klal Yisrael, any position of authority, only a man can be in such a position. So we need to understand a number of things. What is the Makor of the Rambam? Does everybody agree? How far does this go? Question. And this is a shaila which we'll come to at some stage. Ramesh Feinstein has at least one shuv on the subject. A woman being a mashkicha in kashrus. Is that considered to be a position of responsibility? Again, let us not muddy the waters by thinking this is a credibility issue. This isn't. We've been through this. Eidecho neman bisurin. Ish of a sofra lola atzma. She's neman for kores, for zova. It's not a credibility issue. It is... Oh, is it that bad?
Yeah, well,
sorry.
No, it's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Uh-oh. Gosh, that looks... wow. Okay. Yeah. So let's have a look. Kafi shabir achinuch, noshim ein mechuyavis b'mitzvahs hamediniyos. Women, according to the Sefer Achinuch, women are not to be involved in what the Greeks would call the polis, or the affairs of state, which are minoi melech, milchemes amolek. This is the Chinuch, look here, 78, 79. V'zois min ha-mitzvahs hamutoles al ha-tzibur, kulam zechorim, ki lohem yo'us la'asois inyonim eile. Right? That's a direct quote from the Chinuch. So the Chinuch seems to, well, he doesn't seem to, he says that Malchus, Minui HaMalchus, and Milchama is a more obvious one, okay? But he doesn't limit it there. He says these sorts of things are, in other words, he gives it a definition. Things that by definition relate to the public sphere, public policy, where the public make policy and have to have an obligation to appoint a king, etc., women do not have a part in that. It's mutal on the tzibur, and to be more specific, the zecharim of the tzibur. Therefore, the chinuch, the Rambam, would appear to be in line with this chinuch. Okay? Therefore, the Rambam makes sense. Who makes this connection? 80, the Marcheshes. I don't know if you've heard of him, Reb Chanech Eges, one of the poskim, close to the Second World War, actually, the Marcheshes. Okay? HaTorah T'mima, Medayik Miloshin HaDrosha Melech V'lei Malka. The Torah T'mima infers from the Loshen Melech V'lei Malka, Shegam B'mikra She'ena Melech Ben. What would be if generally speaking, there is a concept, and this is a whole big separate topic, heredity, handing over positions in Judaism is a thing. Not only for Malchus, it's Paskin and Shulchan Aruch, also a Rav. If his son is Ro'oi to be the Rav, he gets first choice. That's actually What about, and Malchus, it works that way as well. What would be if a king only has a daughter? Says the Torah to me. We learn from Melech V'lei Malka that even if the king doesn't have a son, the daughter does not inherit the kingdom, even though a woman is Yerush Nachlas Aviha. Yeah? And he brings two Rabbanim, Perle and the Gershuni, who bring a raya from the fact, the Lashon Rambam, another Rambam, the Rambam writes, Harry Malchus loy ulabonov has zechorim adoilam. The Rambam elsewhere clearly seems to indicate that Melucha, Malchus, gets handed over down the male line. And there are those, Rabbi Blumenfeld says it's a mafurish, it's an interesting Maramokim I would never have found in a million years. It's an Abarbanel, apparently. Fine. The Minchas Chinuch argues. The Minchas Chinuch says Melech V'lei Malka is only in the first instance to appoint a queen. But if a king dies and he has a daughter, says the Minchas Chinuch, that wouldn't be included. And there would be no reason why the daughter could not become a queen. Okay? You have the Noda B'Yehuda says a similar thing in Agabe Kahal Gerim, which is another whole topic which we are not going to go into. Right. So that's a summary. Okay? We've got a Rambam, we've got Sefer HaChinuch. We haven't yet got many reasons as such, other than the Chinuch who says that it's matters of public sphere. HaTorah, now here's an interesting thing. We did discuss this, remember? The Torah is written in the male voice, even though it was said to the women as well. The most powerful one to me, remember which one I said? See if you remember from I mentioned it last week. Remember? Ma'amad Har Sinai. Hashem is talking to everyone. Everybody's there. And he says, Lo sachmoid eishes reyecha. He doesn't say your significant other. Eishes. Well, we're talking to the women as well. How does that make sense? I once used this in a conversation with a feminist. This is Hashem's Lashon to all of Klal Yisrael and Har Sinai. And he exclusively, now Lo sachmoid does apply to women. There's no question about that halachically. And yet, so the Torah is written in the male voice. Of course, it means that a woman must not also be jealous of somebody else's husband. That's obvious. But it's still written in the male voice. Therefore, the fact that the Torah says Melech would not necessarily exclude Malka. You need a drosha. That's why you need a drosha. Because the Torah is all written in the male voice. Okay? Now, let's look very quickly into history. We'll come to Dvorah another time, but let's start with Atalia and Shlomtzion, two queens, right? So how does that work? Because remember, in order to become a king or a queen, there is a process. There's a halachic process. You have to be appointed. A Sanhedrin, a Novi, there's Urim V'Tumim, there's Shem and Amishcha. There's a process. It's not just Va'alan, yeah. So bottom line here on this page, Atalia took it by force. She didn't actually ask anyone. So that's not a very good proof. Shlomtzion inherited it from her husband, Yanai Alexander, right? Alexander Yanai. She also had a brother, don't forget, very famously, Shimon ben Shetach, but she was no walk in the park. She was no picnic, right? She was quite happy to kill Chachomim, and what he's saying here is, if you look at what's happening at the time, that we were also fighting a war against the Sadducees, against the Tzidukim, and she was the lesser of the two evils, so we didn't object. But there was no way, but not that she was duly. In other words, you can't use that as a proof to say, oh, there's an example where she was appointed with the das of Chachomim. Certainly not. Neither of these were in any way normal, calm, peaceful situations where the ascension to the throne was done following the protocolen. Certainly not. Yeah, I don't know why it always goes better in that accent. No, sorry, forgive me. I'm overtired. Okay, now, the Rambam then extends this to Kol Mesimos. Miloshen Rambam Mashma She'ein Limnos Noshim, not just to Tafkidim which have Srara, any Tafkid Achra'i. Kol Mesimos. Lefi Rav Feinstein, according to Rav Moshe, Kavona LeTafkid, Hama'afshe Linkoit Emda Neges L'Ritzayin HaMa'avid. Rav Moshe gives it a beautiful definition, as ever. What would be how can you tell if you have a Srara, if you have a Mesima? Do you have a veto? Do you have a say? Or are you able to look at your employer or whoever put you there and say or do something which they're not happy with and follow it through. If you do, you have power. That's the definition. It's a really interesting definition. Yeah? Im niskar lasos neged rutzoin balabayis. That's the definition. So if all you're meant to do, you're a functionary, and all you do is do exactly what they want, and you have no autonomy, no discretion at all, that's not Mesima. Then a woman can do that. But the minute you have a situation where you actually have power, you can veto something, you can act autonomously against, even if the person who hired you says, I don't like this at all. But if you are able then to if you have that ability, then that's Rav Moshe's definition of what is considered power. Okay? We will stop here for today. We'll continue this in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.